I'm actually thinking about checking with the Guinness Book of World Records to see if there's ever been a news agency that has had to issue 3 corrections for patent falsehoods that they admit they had been made in one single article, and now you've made yet another falsehood in your question.
Welcome back to Northern Perspective, everyone. I'm Cypher.
And I'm Fox. We've seen multiple comments about the media being a lot more friendly to Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives. So isn't it a wonder that the Liberals gave them the subsidy of the century when they committed to funding 35% of their salaries up to $85,000 per employee? So what would the Liberals expect in return? Well, loyalty, of course.
Murder me!
And immediate attacks on Pierre, no matter how ludicrous they might be.
Let's take a look.
I'm Mr. Poilievre,
Yes.
Levan from Rebel News. You mentioned certain things that rise to the level of a crime, but there are many things that aren't quite at that level. For example, people marching, calling for an intifada, or using language that may not rise to the level of a criminal prosecution. And you've said before that you respect freedom of speech even for odious views. But what about people who are not Canadian citizens, who are foreign nationals, perhaps here on a student visa to go to our schools, and instead of studying at university, they're participating in these hate marches, intimidating people, Jewish restaurants, calling for the death of Jews. Again, not criminal level, but these are foreign nationals. Would you support canceling the visas and deporting foreign nationals who, instead of doing what they came here to do, are spreading hate at these pro-Hamas rallies?
Thank you for your question. You raise a number of different issues. One, if someone comes here on a student visa and they're not actually a student, then on that basis alone, they should go home. We don't want to have, one of the problems we have with the student visa program is that it has been used as a fraudulent point of entry, particularly for corrupt employers trying to get labor from abroad. So in general, we believe that we should shut down all the fraud in the student visa program, and anyone who claims to come here to study that is not actually studying should not be here. With regards to protests, I do believe in freedom of speech. I believe people should be allowed to say things I disagree with, even things that I find appalling. That is the price of living in a free country. The alternative is to have state censors who then decide what kind of speech is acceptable and what is not, and then who chooses those state censors. And then those censors will pick and choose based on their own political views which speech is allowed and which speech is not. That's why I believe in freedom of expression. You mentioned, for example, if someone stands up and calls for violence against a particular group, they can, under the current criminal code, be charged with incitement. Those provisions already exist. And I would encourage law enforcement to make sure those provisions are upheld for any and all people who deliberately incite violence against an identifiable group, because that has been criminalized for many years. And anyone who is convicted of that, who is not a citizen, should obviously not be in Canada.
That was a very tricky question.
And he navigated it very well.
Very well. It was very interesting to watch him just pick apart that question and address each element of it separately.
And there was one part where Pierre had said, you know, we can have free speech for everybody, or we could have state-sponsored censors that would do, you know, this and this and this and this. And honestly, I would not be surprised if the mainstream media got a hold of that particular clip and was all like, oh, Pierre Poilievre is for state-sponsored censors, and oh my gosh, he's trying to shut down free speech, and just, you know, completely clip it, take it out of context, and just make it into something it's not, because that's what they do.
Well, I also wouldn't be surprised to hear the Liberals say that, because that's what they tried to do with the Bitcoin thing.
Exactly.
So, but the fact that Pierre just disassembled that question into its safe elements and basically addressed free speech, this is what I think, and this is what I've stated. And with the student visas, they're either here to study or they're not. And if they're not, then they go home. And if there's anybody that is utilizing free speech to try to incite violence, there's already pieces of the criminal code to deal with that. So it was very masterfully done. And I don't know if this is just Pierre's years and years and years of experience watching other people handle questions, in addition to probably the PR coaching that he's getting from Lanceman and some of his PR people. It's probably all of the above, but it is so impressive to just see him navigate these very difficult questions.
Hi there, Rob Ford from Global News. Can you explain why the Conservative Party voted against the new Ukraine-Canada free trade agreement?
We didn't vote against a free trade agreement. We brought in the free trade agreement. We voted against Justin Trudeau forcing a carbon tax into that pre-existing agreement. Conservatives understand how devastating the carbon tax has been for Canadians. It's caused 2 million people to go to a food bank every single month, 7 million Canadians not eating enough to stay healthy. We never had these problems before Justin Trudeau and his costly carbon tax. Now he wants to quadruple the tax. And just to show you how pathologically obsessed Trudeau is with his tax, he did something that has never been done in the history of trade agreements, which is to put a carbon tax in one. The people of Ukraine are now going to, he expects them to rebuild from a war with a devastating and crippling tax on their energy. The Ukrainian farmers, he expects them to pay a carbon tax while they're trying to feed their hungry people. This is cruel, and frankly, it is disgusting that Trudeau's ideological obsession with taxing working class people, seniors, and suffering families has come ahead of what should have been a free trade agreement.
Okay, so we've heard a lot about this. And this was brought up at question period. This was brought up during the fall economic statement. And the Liberals are just shaming the Conservatives for voting against this free trade agreement and saying there's no, well, they didn't even deny that there is not a carbon tax in it. But it seems that everybody that supports the Liberals is saying that there's no longer a carbon tax in it.
So I found an article in the Globe and Mail today titled "Revised Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement Does Not Contain Carbon Tax," Ukraine says. I'm not going to read the entire article, but the gist of it is that they called the Ukraine embassy here in Canada, and the person that they spoke to says that it does not contain a carbon tax agreement. However, if you read down further into the article, it says, "The text of the new trade deal does not commit either Canada or Ukraine to a carbon tax, also known as a levy on fossil fuels. It merely says both sides are expected to, quote, promote carbon pricing and measures to mitigate carbon leakage risks," end quote.
Right. So carbon pricing is a carbon tax. And the other thing that it says in the bill, in Section 7, subsection E, it says, promote high levels of environmental protection, including through effective enforcement of environmental laws, mutually supportive trade and environmental policies and practices, and strengthened environmental cooperation between Canada and Ukraine. So what that says is that both sides of the free trade agreement are agreeing to these policies and practices.
And the media is just splitting hairs because it doesn't say the word carbon tax. It says to promote carbon pricing. So, I mean, it's like the chalet versus cabin thing.
Yeah, it's completely ridiculous. And just a couple days ago, the media was all friendly to Pierre and the Conservatives and starting to turn on the Liberals. But as soon as they see a potentially minimal $129 million subsidy dangling in front of their face, tunes change pretty quick in the media.
Next question.
Hi, Paula Loregio with the Canadian Press. Et si vous pouviez répondre dans les deux langues officielles, je l'apprécierais beaucoup. Do you think it was responsible for you to call yesterday's explosion by the by the checkpoint at the Rainbow Bridge terrorism when no U.S. or Canadian officials said that was or authorities said that was the case, and when the New York governor also said there was no evidence to suggest terrorism activity.
Actually, you're wrong. Are you a CP?
This is how you know that the question that you asked is not going to go the way that you thought it would.
You will be destroyed!
Okay, so CP, by the way, CP, just for everyone's knowledge, did have to make 3 corrections for falsehoods that they put into a single article. I think that might be unprecedented. I'm actually thinking about checking with the Guinness Book of World Records to see if there's ever been a news agency that has had to issue 3 corrections for patent falsehoods that they admit they had been made in one single article, and now you've made yet another falsehood in your question.
Oh my gosh.
Wow. Okay, so that was the lead up.
Savage.
So he basically just professionally, in front of everybody, told everybody and told the Canadian press directly, your reporting is junk. It is absolutely substandard garbage reporting.
But he did it in such a way.
Yeah, he did it in such a way that it was a grandiose exposition of how bad their journalism is. Well done, Pierre, but he's just getting started, folks.
Where you are wrong is that CTV reported that the government of Canada was presuming that the incident was terrorist.
Now, if there was ever any doubt about that, here's a screenshot of Rachel Aiello posting this on Twitter. Breaking: national security sources tell CTV News that government officials are operating under the assumption that the incident at the Rainbow Bridge in Niagara Falls is terror-related. More coming.
And if you're wondering who Rachel Aiello is, well, wonder no further, dear viewer. Rachel Aiello would be none other than a senior digital parliamentary reporter for, yes, CTV News.
And if you're wondering what CTV did to try and correct all this, well, then you would not be surprised at all to hear that the answer is absolutely nothing. In fact, they joined the Liberals in trying to attack Pierre for a story that they themselves published.
Feds say no evidence of terrorism in bridge blast. Criticize Poilievre for terrorist attack remark.
Here's what Pierre actually said.
So, yeah, that's what I said in my remarks. You're right. It was a media report.
But it's citing media reports and not...
Which is what I said. In the House, I said there are media reports.
That's exactly what he did say.
That is exactly what he did say.
Mr. Speaker, we've just heard media reports of a terrorist attack, an explosion at the Niagara crossing of the Canada-U.S. border. At least two people are dead, one is injured. It is the principal responsibility of government to protect the people. Can the Prime Minister give us an update on what he knows and what action plan he will immediately implement to bring home security for our people?
So that's what he said. This can't be more clear.
And you think that's a responsible thing to go on? So you put that kind of a statement at the time without speaking?
What kind of statement?
Calling something terrorist?
I didn't. I said there were media reports. No, there's no distinction. What I said, and I was right, was that there were media reports of a terror-related event. By your admission, there were media reports of a terror-related event. And that media report, according to CTV, unless you're questioning their integrity now, came from security officials in the Trudeau government. So do you think the CTV was irresponsible in putting out that tweet?
Well,
Destroyed.
yeah. Let's take a look at some of that article, shall we? Quote, while Canadian government officials had been operating under the assumption that Wednesday's vehicle explosion at the Rainbow Bridge in Niagara Falls was terror-related, according to national security sources, U.S. officials are now saying there is, quote, no indication of a terrorist attack, quote, at this time. So Pierre got his information from CTV News, who got their information from national security sources within the Trudeau government. And now the Trudeau government is now turning around and saying, Pierre was telling everybody this is a terror attack when it wasn't. And CTV and everybody else is trying to say, Pierre was saying this was a terror attack when it wasn't. And Pierre's saying, I wasn't saying it was a terror attack. The media was saying it was a terror attack.
I said the media said it was a terror attack.
Go back and roll the tape. Better yet, go look at Northern Perspective's video. It's too bad he didn't say that, but that's, there's still time. But this is the level of gaslighting that the media is now sinking to, folks.
Because the media doesn't care about bringing out the truth. The media cares about pushing their narrative.
Yeah, and that's the thing. They don't care about truth.
And that's the difference between Northern Perspective and the mainstream media. The mainstream media will push a narrative to absurdity even. And Northern Perspective will gather information, tell you what we found, give you our opinion, but it's all based on facts. And we will show you where we got those facts so that you can also read them and come to your own conclusion.
Right.
Sorry, I'm asking, and I have already answered that. Do you think CTV was irresponsible to put that tweet out? Well, you just did comment. Okay. So, I just hope you're not going to print something that you have to apologize for again.
Wow.
Wow, that was great.
The interviewer becomes the interviewee. Because this is what Pierre does so well. He follows people's lines of thinking and trains of thought better than they do themselves. So she's basically saying that, don't you think it was irresponsible to say that? And he turned it around saying, well, are you trying to say that it was CTV who was irresponsible? Because it was their tweet. The tweet that we showed you is exactly what Pierre is referencing. And notice there's that tweet wasn't taken down. There was no follow-up tweet saying, oh, I wish to correct this.
But the problem is that these reporters come at Pierre like he's an opponent that they need to take down. They don't come at him from a neutral standpoint, which journalists are supposed to do. They don't do that. They come at him to push a narrative. They think that they're going to get him. They're going to ask the question that's going to get him, and then they're going to be on the front page of somebody else's newspaper.
The real question that should be asked is, Pierre, do you think the government was irresponsible by telling CTV News that this was a terror attack before confirming the situation? That's the question that should have been asked. Because the narrative that is trying to be painted here is that Pierre jumped to a conclusion. He was irresponsible, and he started speaking without verifying things. Well, he didn't. He verified with the media, who was supposed to be telling the truth, right, guys? CTV, Global News, National Post, Globe and Mail, CBC, all of them, they say that they just report the truth. That's all they do. That's what we keep hearing from them.
And they're independent, despite being government funded, even more now.
So if we take them at their word, then this is supposed to be the truth. So Pierre has, quote unquote, no reason to mistrust CTV and no reason to, quote unquote, mistrust the government and the national security sources. So what is he supposed to think? How about you go and talk to those people who were talking to CTV and saying, that was kind of irresponsible for you to be putting that information out there before all the facts were given. Because people are going to take you at your word. And this is the thing. They can't have it both ways. And in question period, Karina Gold was criticizing him. It was irresponsible for him to stand up and say that. Our government is incompetent and shouldn't have told the CTV News that, but we're not going to talk about that.
It's just insane the way these liberals just gaslight everybody. They pass the buck instead of saying, oh yeah, we screwed up by telling CTV that, there was a terror attack in Niagara Falls, or there was a suspected terror attack. No, we're going to pick on the guy who said that media is reporting that there was a terror attack. It's absurd.